Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 3 of our series, Black Lives Matter Workplace Edition. I'm Lindsay McKee, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee Chair of the Southeastern Wisconsin chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought to light the systemic racism that Black people experience in America, and we are seeking to shine the light specifically on the Black experience in the workplace. Our D&I committee is presenting this series of free Black Lives Matter related virtual events to address what it means to be Black in the workplace, the actionable steps leadership must take to make their organizations more inclusive, how allies can advocate for Black colleagues, and how we can all continue the conversation into our personal lives. In part 1, we reflected on where we are in our workplace inclusivity. In part 2, we examined the concrete actions companies should take to recruit, retain, and advance Black workers. And today we will consider how we can speak up and be advocates for change in our workplaces and maybe into our personal lives and in our communities as well. So now I would like to introduce our panel. Today's panelists are Diverse and Resilient Grants and Program Support Coordinator, Demi Carter, King Drive Business Improvement District Executive Director, Deshea Agee, Milwaukee Urban League President and CEO, Dr. Eve Hall. Welcome all of you.
Glad to be here with you today and everyone.
Glad to have you here. This is such a crucial discussion, especially as we're waiting for some news from Wauwatosa as well. So let's just go ahead and get started. I do have some questions prepared to ask each of you, but I also want to encourage our audience to submit questions via the chat feature. I will keep checking that chat feature and I'll read the questions received aloud for the panelists to answer. So to start, to our panelists, tell us about your own career journey and experiences as Black workers. Dr. Hall, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, okay. I have to say I've had a very blessed journey. I've been in multiple environments where it's been one or two of us, to environments where we've been in the majority. And, I've learned through my journey, it has really been about the ability to create authentic relationships. Whether you're Black, white, Hispanic, Hmong, what have you, we're still all people. And I've learned that as we just learn each other as individuals, and oftentimes the workplace is one of the best places to learn each other, especially if we're involved in projects. I've found that when there are projects and work at the workplace and different people have to come together, that tends to help people learn each other a bit more, versus when we're always working in silos.
Right.
So, I've experienced times when it's been somewhat painful, when you don't necessarily feel understood, but at the same time, I don't know, my attitude around this has just been around relationship building, and that people are people, and people only can come from their own personal experiences. Mm-hmm. And until they experience something different, we have to sometimes just embrace people where they are.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Deshea, let's move on to you. Tell us about your career journey.
No, it's been quite interesting. I'll go back to after college, when I first met Dr. Hall, when I worked in radio sales at 1290 WMCS.
Forgetting that, Deshea.
Yeah. So we go back a little ways, and that's working true. For a community radio station like 1290 at the time that was doing Heritage Day and so many amazing things that brought the community together. The Thanksgiving food giveaway, turkey giveaways, and working with organizations like the Milwaukee Brewers and Salvation Army and so many others, that gave me right out of college a vision of what it means to really be a Black person working in a space that improves your community. Going from that to, I'll take a couple of steps here and mention when I went through that Associates in Commercial Real Estate program, the ACRE program, and I had an opportunity to learn real estate development and get exposed to some of the largest developers in the state of Wisconsin, engage with them, learn from them, learn with other people of color in that program, and had an opportunity to work in Oconomowoc at Pabst Farms, which I probably was one of the only Black people that was out there on a regular basis. So that was quite an experience. And I felt like, in all honesty, I represented Black men in general, because there were not other Black men that were out there working, not just not working for the developer, but not really in Oconomowoc. And this was in 2005 when I had this experience. And I felt that it was important to carry myself in a certain way, regardless of if there were some racial tension that I felt, in various situations there. But I knew that it was a great opportunity to work for and with a great team at Pabst Farms, working for the developer, Peter Bell. And from there, having a chance to, again, take a couple of steps and go work in the city of Milwaukee and be the Bronzeville project manager. It took me back to my roots, my community work, my public service. That was the start of my public service career. I really appreciated being able to engage with residents in Halyard Park and Harambe and Brewers Hill and talk with and about how do we bring the excellence of African-American culture back with the Bronzeville Culture and Entertainment District. And that to me was a huge step, but it also gave me a chance to visit other communities and also continue to, provide a vision of who Black men are. When the media sometimes will paint a picture of who Black men are, it's important for us that Black men and Black women in particular, but I would say for me as a Black man, it gave me a chance to sort of highlight and give a different vision for Black men who are doing positive things in the community and throughout Milwaukee, for that matter. Take another step to where I am now at the Business Improvement District on King Drive. I think it has been my effort to continue that effort to show that there are positive things that Black men do. We can be educated, and we are educated, and we are professional, and we do the things that are necessary to improve our community when an opportunity comes. So it has been a pleasure, working as the executive director of the Business Improvement District for about 4.5 years now. So I look back at all of those experiences, and to me, when I think about it, it's something that I never thought when I was younger I would have to represent a entire gender just about in certain instances when I'm the only one in that room. Because in some cases, I found myself to be the only Black person in that room, male or female. And there were conversations that I had to have. And when we think about Black Lives Matter right now, to me, it's important for us to all not be silent in the fact that Black lives do matter, and that it's important for everyone in all cultures to kind of work together, build community, and really show love right now for each other. And that's something that if we do not do that, we will continue to head down a road where conversations we're having today will have in the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years. So we are at a critical juncture of having conversations around culture, race, segregation, economic equity, and all forms of equity. And so I'm just happy to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Deshea. Demi, let's hear about your career journey so far.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Demi Carr, and my pronouns are they, them. So just to touch on a few points that were made earlier, I'm already seeing that this issue is starting to be framed around those traditional gender norms and binaries of male, female. I identify as a person of trans experience, and I also believe that our lives matter as well within the Black Lives Matter movement. So I wanted to get that point out there. To start off, I found the question relatively problematic, and I'll say it on this front because it already starts out by alienating the Black experience versus the white experience. And, you know, I come from a generation where we don't want to just be at the table, we want to be embraced for who we are, truly and fully. So I find it problematic in essence, in the sense that I need to portray a certain kind of image or morale that is aligned with whiteness in terms of, you know, all the professionalism and all of that. We can get into that mess later. However, I do find it relatively problematic as if it doesn't acknowledge the common denominator that is there that we all experience, which is racism. So definitely my experiences have been shaped by racism. As many of the folks here have said, Dr. Hall, you know, I have always been a person who has been that trailblazer, been the only one, you know, at the table, only person of color there. But with that comes a tremendous responsibility as well. And so we can go into those topics a little later, but I just did not want us to keep out of mind that the common denominator here is racism and the experiences that people have on the workforce. In particular, my perspective is from the public health perspective. And so I just look at, you know, how racism even impacts those Black people who may consider themselves privileged, right? So in public health, you would think that as you increase someone's education level, someone's income level, that they would have a better quality of life. But that's not the case for Black people. We end up seeing it do this kind of U-shape. And the reason why that is because of the effects of racism. When you're the trailblazer, when you're that one person there, you experience racism at a more toxic level than even some folks who are lower level staff. So I just want us to be mindful of this common denominator when we talk to this question. So that's it.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much, Demi, and thank you for sharing your pronouns with us as well. That's very helpful. So I would like to kind of go into, and a couple of you have touched on this already, but tell me more about your transition into kind of being this community leader. You know, all of you are in, of course, your work roles, but then you also have those opportunities to go out into our community and speak to so many different people. Tell us about that transition into more of that community leadership role. And Demi, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay. So I will say this, that, you know, when you're dealing with something like racism, structural inequities, you know, these are complex, wicked problems, right? So it requires us to be smarter about it, smarter in our approach. You know, we can't dismantle our master's house using a master's tool. That was Audre Lorde who said that, and I'm a fond believer in that. Because, you know, we have to approach this from a complex lens. Racism touched multiple points of the lives, popular today, but it affects multiple points in people's lives. It's not just a workplace issue, it's a healthcare issue, it's home economics issue, it's various different things that, so we have to be smarter in our approach. And I think realizing that very early on in one's career will help you be more grounded with community members. It will also help us empower, and I noticed this myself, even in my role, you know, just coming into this position within the last year, you know, helping other folks who felt voiceless, using your position, that little level of power that you have to now influence other people to speak up more and to develop more of that bottom up kind of style of leadership. In essence, you know, I don't see leadership as a form of that traditional hierarchical model, like do away with it. You know, leadership is more so listening to those frontline staff, listening to the experience of the diversity of experience that people bring with them. That's how we move forward in the 21st century. So that's, I'll end there on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Demi. Deshea, how about you, your transition into community leadership?
Feel like what I have been through, Lindsay and everyone, has been just an ongoing build on a foundation that has been started, you know, from directly out of college. Having the ability to impact people's lives has always been something that I kind of learned from folks like Don Rosette and Willie Davis, you know, when I worked at 1290, and having their sort of spirit being a part of me now and carrying in the role that I carry here at the Business Improvement District is that role of how to impact and have a positive influence in the role or in the lives of young folks in the community from the residential perspective, how to make sure that our properties are being revitalized in the neighborhood, how to make sure businesses and entrepreneurship is being encouraged. And this is something that I, you know, had the opportunity to do both at the city of Milwaukee and again, just in different roles working throughout the course of my career. So for me, I think the transition has been just an evolution in all honesty. It wasn't one thing that I did here or there. It just was a matter of engaging with individuals on an ongoing basis, similar to what Dr. Hall said earlier, you know, building authentic relationships along the way that put me in a position to have the Business Improvement District role to, again, have an impact in Harambe, you know, in Brewers Hill, Halyard Park. And as I look at where I grew up on 14th and Burleigh, you know, going even back to that, you know, one of those 53206 kids, you know, and I think about when 53206 wasn't a prominent zip code for the bad reasons. I just think about, you know, I had a chance to live there and walk in the neighborhoods and see things happening. And what inspired me to get into real estate development was seeing some of the guys who I grew up with doing some bad things, you know, and making some life choices that led them to fast money, but it didn't lead them to a long life. And so seeing like how our community needs people like myself and Dr. Hall and Demi to be in our positions, we can probably think back to 10, 15 years ago where it was less of us in these roles. And Dr. Hall mentioned it in our offline conversation, you know, the opportunity for there to be more people of color elevated to positions of, to executive positions. That's something that I have been able to see, and I will continue to support that because, again, diversity in ideas can bring different outcomes for organizations, for our community, and just how we are all seeing, you know, the lives of Black and Brown and queer individuals as well impacted. You know, there is racism, there is discrimination, you know, it has been systematized and we all don't see it, but those people of color, some here on this call today and others that we know, they experience it on a regular basis. So, you know, being able to transition to a community support role is kind of how I look at it, is really supporting the work of revitalizing our community, you know, and it's not about each one of us, or it's not about me individually or my title. What it really is, you know, me having, and I'm a faithful person, I'm a spiritual person. So, you know, I believe God put me in a position to be able to grow in this role. And I don't know where he's going to take me in the future, but I can tell you I am enjoying this opportunity to have an influence in this community role right now.
Absolutely. Dr. Hall, speaking to you as well about your transition or evolution to community leadership. And to Demi's point, you know, not necessarily just being at the top of your company hierarchy, but just being that voice, that leader in the community.
Well, you know, as I was listening to Demi and listening to Deshea, I really had to think about my whole career, which I'm a little bit older than you all, so I could talk even more, you know, so, but, you know, first of all, I think being considered a community leader is an honor and one that we should never take lightly. So even at this point, when somebody calls me a community leader, I take that with honor. I take that with responsibility, because that means that people believe in you in some level and trust in you in some level. You know, Demi mentioned something earlier about just racism always being at the center of so much. And it's true, you know, as we look at our lives and all of us on this call, you know, there's our panelists, we always at some level are conscious about color. And it's either directly or indirectly in our face. I mean, that is the world in which we live in. When I think about my own kind of community evolution, I have always been driven by making a difference for other people. Even when I was, you know, a teenager, you know, I loved helping to tutor kids and help read, you know, when they could learn something, I get really excited, you know. And I watched my family, my grandparents, you know, my aunt and uncles, all of them were involved in community some kind of way. So I grew up with that sense. But I think it was interesting when I went to Florida A&M University, which is a historically Black college down in Tallahassee, Florida. And I was very active on my campus. And it was funny because, you know, we talk about race. Growing up, and I grew up in Milwaukee, I could only go so far in terms of certain positions in my high school. So you couldn't be the homecoming queen necessarily. You couldn't be so-and-so. There were certain roles that you could only play. When I went to Florida A&M University, which was a majority Black school, guess what? The sky was the limit. I was campus queen. I made up for all the queens I could ever be. And I was involved in a lot of different activities. But what was wonderful about that period of time for me is that if I was successful in something, if I won something, if I didn't win, I knew it wasn't based on color. I knew just someone else beat me out. And so, you know, people talk about that experience, and historically Black colleges, that's another part of my family because my father went to one. So we were all, you know, that's all his side of the family, where my mother went to predominantly white schools in college in Michigan. But I learned as I grew up, because I was back and forth to the South and to the East, how our culture is so strong and how so often we are discounted for what we bring to the table. And that we do have, you know, very smart individuals, very creative individuals, because the stereotype and media tends to not show that. And when I was at FAMU, you know, you're looking at a Black president of your college. You're looking at Black professors. You're looking at the Maya Angelos and the Jesse Jacksons and all the people that come to visit your campus. So all you're fed is the richness of the culture. And that oftentimes is just not perpetuated enough within our environment. So how have I used my community leadership role? What I've always done in every place I've been, you all, is try to promote the positive in our community. If it was when I was teaching school, okay, I was a learning disabilities teacher in Tampa, Florida. Well, guess what? A lot of times my kids were not always seen as ones who could help with career day. So guess what? At that time, my last name was Johnson. Miss Johnson's kids were the guides and, you know, the representatives at career day, because I wanted those children to be seen as valuable and that they could contribute to. You know, I move on and I think about just, you know, teaching and making sure, and my classes were mixed, that all my children truly learned, no matter where they were coming from, what color their skin was. As a teacher, I was responsible. When I came back to Milwaukee and I started, believe it or not, working for the Milwaukee Urban League, I studied under the first female, at that time, executive director and the deputy. And they taught me so much, not knowing that years later I would become the CEO of the Urban League. So you never know your journey. Like I saw Deshea where he was going to be today as the executive director. He didn't know it, but I was watching him as he kind of got frustrated because he didn't move where he thought he was supposed to move. But I kept saying, yeah, but that may not be where you're supposed to move, which it wasn't, because he was supposed to be where he is now. But I digress there, but I just had to throw that in for Shay, just because I know him so well. And Demi, if I knew you, I could probably say the same thing on probably a number of different fronts. But, you know, it was interesting when I taught school for 3 years, I realized that I wanted to continue to find platforms in which I could impact and influence more and more people. I didn't think about title. I just thought about platform. And so when I was at the Urban League, I was, doing some great things with after school program, with the GED program for adults for high school. I was right there in the community impacting. Moved on and worked with some pre-college programs. Moved on and worked for the school district. Moved on and worked for Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which is where I think I met Deshea. But that was a national role. So, because again, I was always thinking, how can I impact more and more people? And in every role, it was always about highlighting and supporting our children, or could be parents, so that they could be the best that they could be. It was about formulating conversations across race, across gender, across religion, to think about how we could make our environment better. And that's always been my center, no matter where I am. And my prayer has always been, Lord, just guide me to where you want me to go next. So if you were looking to me to say, well, how did you map out your career? I'm not that person. What I always did was I did the very best that I could wherever I was. And God would always give me, and in all due respect, I use God, but it's not, I don't mean to disrespect anyone on this call, so I just want to say. But when I get that spiritual urging that it's time to move on and certain things are presented, I have to really be open to know whether I think my time is done at a certain place or not, that it may be time to move on, or it may be time to do something else. And that's just, again, I think it's important for us to kind of know those things internally, but use our platforms to bring people together, but also use our platforms to be very candid in a professional way that keeps people at the table on the realities of what we deal with. Because here's the other piece. We may all have these wonderful jobs, technically. But what we know as African Americans in this country is that when we get in our cars, nobody knows what we do. When we go to the hospital necessarily, nobody knows what we do. And so we all experience some kind of stereotype or racism depending on who the person is we are interacting with. And so, and I think Demi made that point earlier, it is not about our economics, our class, our money, because unfortunately in the United States of America, so much is predicated on the color of your skin. And that's why we are at this turning point in this country of truly reconciling with this, after I believe everyone in this country, because of COVID, was stopped in their tracks to reflect on who we are, whether it's we look at our families, we look at ourselves individually, and it made us understand how we don't have an openness for people that aren't like ourselves. And when everyone saw George Floyd, I think that was the turning point, because nowadays we all know someone of another race, technically, right? Of another religion. So when we see harm being done, if you have any kind of soul, you are going to feel their pain. And everybody felt George Floyd's pain at that moment. Everybody felt his pain when he called out his mother's name, because guess what? We all have mothers on some level. And when you saw the outbreak across the world, and you saw the diversity of people, that is a very different march today than it was in the marches that we read about and see about in the 60s. And that is because even though there's a lot more work we have to do in terms of diversity and coming together, we are further along now than we were then. There's still more diversity at the workplace. There's still more African Americans and other people of color in leadership positions. Do we need to improve? Yes, but we're in more positions than we were at that time. There are projects, community initiatives, workplace initiatives that have cross-racial participation now, whether it's in the community or on the workforce. And when we look at families, there's more mixing, there's more interracial couples. There are more couples that actually adopt from outside their race. So what does that mean? It means that when things happen for ourselves, whether good or bad, we're connected to someone somehow in our world. And so at least there's some space of understanding what's happening with that person. So I know I went on and on, so I will stop.
No, that's perfect.
But,
that was
that just
absolutely
came to my
perfect.
mind.
And I'd love to hear more about a personal experience. So thinking about helping people understand kind of what we do go through, especially for those of us on the call who may not be Black individuals. I'd love, Dr. Hall, if you could share a specific racist incident you've experienced at work where you wish maybe a white colleague or another ally stood up for you or with you.
You know, I kept thinking about that question, and I'll be honest, I don't have an example of that right now. Okay. Well, wait a minute. No, there's one. And so I'll be a little bit nebulous. So in a particular position, I just thought about that. I had wanted an opportunity to participate in something that I saw other people participate in. And it was primarily white males. And I knew that I could have done it too. I could have had this particular opportunity. And someone who knew the skills that I had was white, did not vouch for me. However, there was someone else. I had to be very diplomatic and kind of overstep that person who was trying to block me. And I had to go, quite frankly, to another white individual who made the way for me. So in this situation, you know, where we're trying to maybe butt heads one against another race, I had an experience of where one particular person did not necessarily want to support me. And I understood there were some underlying things there. But I'm one of those people, I do not stop at no. If I know something's really right and I really feel like I should have a certain opportunity. So I figured a way in that case. And it was another white person who made sure that happened for me.
Interesting. Thank you. Deshea, similar question. I'd love to hear about, well, I wouldn't love to hear about, but I would be interested to hear about a racist incident that you experienced where you wish a colleague had stood up for you.
I want to think that this was not racism, but it was hard to see it another way. And it goes to a point Dr. Hall briefly touched on. I had a particular position as well where I was hired to do, let's say X. And in the course of doing those responsibilities, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G was added to my responsibilities.
Okay.
When that happened in other instances, there was things like job reclassifications, title change, various things that happened that also affected people who were not people of color. It affected them monetarily to the positive. But for me, there was no effort made to do the same things that was done for my white colleagues. And I observed that not only was it my observation, but there were observations by others, both African-American and individuals who were not African American who shared with me that there was an inequity there, that it should have been things that occurred that they had seen occur with others that was not occurring with me. And there were questions as to why that was the case. And during that time, I think I maybe stayed in that particular position longer than I thought I should have. But I felt that there were things that I should be doing, and I had not gotten that touch that Dr. Hall mentioned, that spiritual motion to say it's time to move on. And when that came over my spirit that it was time to move on, I did just that. And I point to that incident because I think there will be others in the course of history who are in positions who will be given additional responsibilities that they will not be compensated for, recognized for, or not have a opportunity to grow in the way that they should. Some will say that that was racist. Some will say that that was inequality. Me being the person that it happened to, I take it as it was a lesson. It was a lesson that I needed to learn, that there will be those who support you. There will be those who will not. There will be those who see you in a different way, positive or negative. And there will be those like my sister, Dr. Hall here, who want to see you blossom and grow. And you have to understand that when that opportunity is before you, if you aren't a spiritual person or a religious person, if you just want to meditate or think about if the time is right for you, you have to make that decision. That was the biggest lesson for me that I needed to learn over the course of my life, because it has been sort of a barometer that I judge things by at this point in my life, to say, is this the right time for me to be in a specific position? And I would say where I am right now, this is the right time to be on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, building the best King Drive in the nation, because there is a need to bring visibility to the street that bears Dr. Martin Luther King's name. Right. And it should not continue to be a perception, which for some is reality. In Milwaukee, we're trying to change that. But it should not continue to be a perception that any street that bears the name of Dr. Martin Luther King should be experiencing blight, disinvestment, and the negative ills of any community, bad roads, unclean streets. So our effort, and my effort in particular, in addressing what, again, for some who had challenges or issues with renaming a street after Dr. Martin Luther King, not just here in Milwaukee. If we notice, it stops at McKinley Avenue. It doesn't go all the way down to Wisconsin Avenue. And if we notice that it stops at Capitol and it doesn't go all the way to Green Bay, there was a particular effort to limit the length of the street, not just in Milwaukee for Dr. Martin Luther King, but there was an effort nationally. In some cities, it's one block, literally. In some cities, it's an honorary name. In some cities, it's 10 miles. In some cities, it's a highway. In Milwaukee, it's 4 miles. I'm very happy that we have 4 miles right next to the Vale R. Phillips Avenue, which goes further. And if we think about the individuals that had a role in the 2019 effort to change 4th Street to Vale R. Phillips, it does cross that line that people don't think it should cross. But it does go into areas that are not just the Black area. It goes into areas that also are the more prominent parts of Milwaukee. And so, as I think about, racism and where we are with Black Lives Matter, and how, as Dr. Hall shared, when George Floyd, I call it a murder, was televised, when that happened, it brought people to a point where many said, that's enough. We had on Dr. Martin Luther King Drive, we had over 2,500 people that came to help clean up Dr. Martin Luther King Drive after the unrest, after the destruction that was caused at the end of May. We had people come out and say, literally, as I talked to them, I'm like, where did all these people come from? I'm very happy everyone's here. Just want to understand, like, what made you come out today? And there were many people say, I'm fed up. I'm tired of this. You know, this cannot continue to happen. And these were white individuals that came out. These were Hispanic and Latino individuals. These were Arab Americans. These was Black Americans. So many people came out and said, I'm not okay with this happening. And I felt this was something that I can do, something small that I could do just to sort of protest in support of Black Lives Matter. And so, you know, when I think about that experience that I had, and I could have done several things. I could have been angry about it. I could have, you know, made a lot of noise about that position that I didn't maybe move to, or that opportunity that wasn't realized for me in that position that I'm speaking about. But what I did was remain calm, which is sometimes what we have to do. We have to quiet that loud voice that's in our head that's telling us to go and do something or say something. And I quieted it and I became better for it. And that's oftentimes what we don't think about, the power of our subconscious mind to follow a suggestion from our conscious mind of what to do. And so it's important for us to take a moment to just realize who we are and whose we are, why we're here, and what our role is in the specific role that we have. And again, as I am the executive director of the Business Improvement District on King Drive, there are some things that we've seen happen over the last 4.5 years that I'm very proud of. We've been able to attract some amazing partners to Dr. Martin Luther King Drive who also are in support of equity in so many ways: health equity, economic equity, racial equity, and just how do we continue that going forward? We just have to quiet our minds when that racist moment happens, right, and just say, it's not okay, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm. And those are such great examples, Deshea. It really gets at how even a decision that happens in the workplace can affect so many different aspects. You know, that decision to not lengthen MLK happened in a workplace, and it makes you wonder who was in the room, who wasn't in the room to make that occur. Demi, I want to make sure I get to you. Could you share a racist incident that occurred with you in the workplace and where you wish someone would have stood up for you?
Okay, so I also want to be respectful of time, so I'll keep it rather brief.
No worries.
I would say, like, this is also, like his Dr. Hall, it's kind of a hard kind of thing to tease out because, you know, there hasn't been a direct racist incident, but it's the subtle racisms, the microcosms, you know, it has been a combination of those things that I have experienced. And most recent, the thing that comes to mind is, so I'll start off with this way. In 2017, 2018, Harvard University conducted a study and revealed the results of those studies that, and this was all medical students, what were their perceptions of Black people's endurance for pain, right? And overwhelmingly, it was shocking that a lot of these students felt that Black people could endure pain at greater rates than white people could, which we all know is a damn myth. I'm sorry, excuse me. No. Which we all know is a myth. However, you know, it painted the reality that these are the folks who will then go out, and these are, you know, the best of the best, so to speak, who will go out into the field, who will be the future of health, to be the future of public health. And they already come with these narratives, perceptions, beliefs that are rooted in slavery, that Black people can endure more pain than white people. And, the sad reality is it was a wake-up call that, even if these Harvard University students are feeling this way, well, then how are your students feeling about it? So the most recent experience I could share is I was a PhD student at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And at the time, I was the only African-American person of color, right? Because we also see people drawing talent from Africa and we'll say like this is their diversity, right? But we know that those are stark differences between the experience that someone who comes to the United States will experience as a first generation immigrant versus a person of color who is descendant of slaves has experience in this country. So I speak to that point, this notion that, being in this program, I didn't really have anyone who I could lean on. I'm more of a philosopher. Public health is very by the book, matter of fact, but understanding, and this is what the beauty that I brought to these kind of programs, is that, you can't, when you work with people, it's never A plus B equals C. It's always more complex, right? So just not having staff who thought outside of that parameter, right? It led to a lot of fatigue. It led to a lot of battles, right? And I was in my program for 3 years and I was just fighting all the time and then seeing physically that, Black people are dying on our campus at the medical college. A recent issue, there was a pregnant mother, she gave birth. After that, she had postpartum hypertension, diabetes. She worked as a staff in the kitchen there, ended up having a stroke. And instead of them taking this woman right to Frederick, which is a D1 medical institution, right? Instead of there, they actually called an ambulance, and the ambulance had diverted her from Frederick because at the time their emergency room was full, right? And mind you, medical institutions can't refuse people. Had you wheeled them over or brought them in, but because of that, this ambulance was transferred to St. Lucas on the south side, which was 45-minute ride for this person. They ended up passing, and the story was buried. And to me, as a student, as an activist, as someone, it didn't sit well with me. And I also didn't feel that support from my staff. So to answer this question, I wish white folks would have acknowledged the racial fatigue now that they are now, right, with this latest wave of Black Lives Matter, because I've also marched back in 2000 and Mike Brown, but this legacy continues for us all, and it's unfortunate, right? But I've also marched for Black Lives Matter, and so now people are starting to get that this fatigue, but that's something that stuck with me, that even in a program like this, an institution, being treated differently than my white colleagues in the sense that I can endure trauma, I can be resilient, all of these narratives that we pride ourselves on as Black folk. However, these white folks believe in this, and also just creating terrible experience for us and not acknowledging our own mental health and wellness. So in there, but that is a moment where I wish white people would have stepped up and say, you know what, I get it. I see that you are burnt out, just stepping up in those ways. And it's unfortunate, but I will say this, I do plan on pursuing a PhD again, maybe not at the Medical College of Wisconsin. That was a lesson learned, as so many of our panelists, Dr. Hall, and as well as Deshea, if it's not written in the cards for you, then maybe that wasn't the path that you needed to go, but it was very much a learning lesson for me. So I'll end it there. Just wishing white people would acknowledge that we also get tired and we fight racism every day, and it leads to a lot of health issues. For myself in particular, I gained over 100 pounds and I also had hypertension issues. So it was literally killing me being in these toxic environments. So I'll stop there.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences. I do think that serves as a great foundation. And I did not want to interrupt you guys as you shared that. So going on, what would you say are some of the biggest barriers for people speaking up at all, especially at work? And how do you recommend people speak up anyway? And Demi, I'd like to go to you first with that question.
Okay. So, I mean, I approach this from two perspectives. So, as Dr. Hall mentioned earlier, I had a similar experience where the person who I thought this was a person of color, very prominent African American woman in the city of Milwaukee, I'm thinking that I could work under this person's mentorship. However, you know, there wasn't this mentorship relationship, it was more an abusive relationship where do as I say. And that was creating reports and all of these other different things. However, understanding that there needs to be some reciprocation, some sharing of knowledge, right? So just coming from those kind of experiences, for me personally, it influenced how I pursue leadership, right? No longer am I going to define success in a sense that success is my academic achievements. It's the amount of funding that I was able to acquire for people, things like that. No longer will I define success. So it took a mental shift in defining how I see success. And part of success is uplifting. I was a McNair scholar as well, named after Carl McNair, the scientist, astronaut. So I was a McNair scholar as well. And, part of our model was, so academics by day, soldiers by night. And what that means is that, you bring up those others who are around you. And right now that has created a huge network for me. There are people who are just a phone call away who I know who are doctors who got their PhDs, who are also, architects, things like that. And that's the beauty of it all. And I think for me, going forward, mentorship, excuse me, keep getting phone calls, but mentorship is key, right? And I see myself as being someone who uplifts others around me. So that's my point on that question. So I'll end it there.
That's okay. Deshea, also to you, barriers to people speaking up and how to recommend to people to speak up anyway.
There we go. I think the biggest barrier I've seen has been kind of myself, or in other people's instances themselves, that fear of what's going to happen if we speak up, that fear of retaliation, that if we say something, what will that mean? And how to do that speaking up, you kind of got to go to the top, and you have to have the conversation. It may be a little rough of a conversation, but it's easier to go to the top and have a conversation, because that is the best way that it can ripple back down. Because if you try to just have the conversation amongst your colleagues at your position level, in some cases, depending on the type of structure you're in, there's a hierarchy, and if it goes back up to the top, that story will be different by the time it gets to the top. Like the game that you probably or seen people play, or you played it, where you start a story and by the time it gets to the end is different. When you want to speak up, it's easier to just go to the top so that they can hear, directly from you. You have to be confident and comfortable, in your own skin, in your own person, to be able to say what you think, and say it in a nice, mannerable way, where it's not offensive, where it's honest, but it also is direct. Because if you cannot be direct about an issue specifically around race and being able to communicate that in this time, I specifically say in this time, this is an era where, with Black Lives Matter, with COVID, with so many things that are happening, the conversation opened up a lot more at the end of May. Mm-hmm. And there were more people willing to have conversations at the end of May. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a poll that was taken. I saw it where, the folks were asked who supports Black Lives Matter in June. It was like 61 to 38%. And now it's like 48% to 48%. So some of that feeling of the support behind Black Lives Matter may have changed for some, but that doesn't mean Black Lives Matter any less than they did at the time or in the past or in the future. So I think that the way to speak up is still to say what you're thinking and realize that, you know, there are people of all races that love you, that support you, and want to see you grow as a person, and they have empathy for you as a person, and you should have empathy for them. In the course of my career, I've had all kind of colleagues that literally, you know, I still will have a drink with. You know, we'll still have conversations. We'll go places. We'll meet up. Social distancing, I'll say that now. But being able to engage with people is one thing that is missing right now. You know, and that human connection is just so needed in so many ways. Dr. Hall said, no, I haven't seen him. So we haven't been in the spaces that we used to be. Lindsay, our events that we had for the bid, we haven't been able to do that. So the human connection is missing. But when you asked me to do this today, like it was like I get a chance to reconnect with you a bit, you know,
Yes.
and other professionals that are in the public relations group with you. And so, you know, I think that as we look and see how do we engage when we have a question or concern, or we have that fear of retaliation, just know that we should be able to go to the top. And if we can't go to the top, it wouldn't hurt to share your concern with a colleague. And you can ask them to keep it confidential, or you can also say, hey, I need help with this. How would you address this? Because now you're bringing someone else into your feeling and your experience. And that could not only help them to understand what you're going through, but that can also help them to grow and be a little more empathetic to someone else who they may interact with that has a similar feeling as you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Deshea. And I do want to remind everyone to feel free to submit questions via the chat. I do want to keep going. I know we have our virtual networking for the last half hour. I know we're at the 1 o'clock hour, but I do want to keep going. I thought it was important to really let you guys share your experiences. And now we're kind of getting into those specific tips. So please do submit your questions. Dr. Hall, though, same question to you.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that's okay.
Oh, okay. I thought you were getting ready to say something else.
Yes, I was. That's okay.
Okay. So I don't want to be redundant. I think we've heard things, but I will say I think it's important for the leadership of companies to promote a culture of trust. Oftentimes, company leaders will say, you know, please, let's be open. Let's have a conversation. But when leaders do that, they have to be responsible for those who become vulnerable and open, that they protect them, and that there is not, as what was mentioned earlier, any type of retaliation. You know, all of a sudden you can't be promoted, you know, you're isolated, or people are avoiding you. So, you know, and I've said this on some other panels where there have been CEOs on the panel of companies, and we actually were speaking to this issue about how do you begin to engage conversations in the workplace, and how do you allow people to be able to speak up on concerns? And that's what I indicated. So it has to come from the leadership to promote and support that kind of environment.
And Dr. Hall, do you think that that internal and external work can happen simultaneously? You know, is it possible for that organization to kind of fix their own DEI issues while also being that advocate out in the community?
I think so. So I was on, I thought, a very interesting call. Epstein Ewan, I'll actually name the company because Rich Tennyson, I think many of you may know him. But anyway, they were doing something both on the outside and the inside. So they were creating a space internally for all their staff to pose different questions. And it was really to this panel. It was a primarily African-American panel. I was part of it. And questions they've always had, concerns they've always had, but embarrassed or did not want to ask. And so they were able to put those questions forward. Nobody knew. And we were able to answer and just share whatever it was that they were mentioning. what they were going to do with that is then go back internally and have continued conversations about what did they need to do to improve their environment. So what they were doing was first taking a look inside, setting up a framework, setting up a schedule. They meet now, I think, every several weeks, and they have different conversations around race, but they're taking a look at what's happening internally. At the same time, they are continuously inviting different panels in that represent different races, religions, sexual preference, whatever the case is, just so they begin to open the minds of their employees to diversity and how we have to embrace everyone. So that is an example I thought was just an excellent one, where again, it was concurrent, okay, simultaneously, where they're working inside, but they're inviting others to hone in on a conversation so that they can speak intelligently and hear other people's experiences and perspectives.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to have that same question to Demi. Diverse and Resilient actually has quite a few programs that they take into workplaces. So same question, can that happen concurrently where they're getting their own house in order, so to speak, while also being that advocate out externally?
Mm-hmm. So this is such a timely conversation. Considering everything that our organization stands for, we had to do some not fact checking, looking in the mirror, so to speak, looking internally ourselves in terms of the programming that we offer as well. So this is an LGBTQ resource organization for people of color. However, oftentimes staff have felt as though we have missed the mark on addressing women folk as well as trans folk. And so you don't get at those kind of conversations if you're constantly enmeshed in that environment. Sometimes it takes a third party to waken you up to that. Also, the structure of our leadership, all of these different conversations that were not there. So having external groups like we have been working with Ubuntu, for example, to help us understand, what are the effects of racism? What does dignity work looks like in the work environment as you try to restructure? Now, we're a small organization, so you have to take that into account as well when you talk about, do staff feel comfortable going to leadership, right? If I'm at a Fortune 500 company, those kind of relationships may not exist, right? There's always some intermediary. So one of the benefits of being a smaller organization is that you can have more of these type of fruitful conversations around inclusion. And I just wanted to double back on a previous point. Again, as I said, you have to get smart, and that's my approach about getting smart and being dynamic about these wicked problems as well that exist. So just to touch again on those points is the importance of the diversity of perspective. Oftentimes, and this is my just interpretation, and correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, but just my interpretation that there is a race to kind of the top that happens in the Black community, right? Well, let me see who is known as, speaking to this point and all of this. So we constantly are getting those same voices. And then how are we being plural in a sense, right? And I always frame this in terms of, what does it mean to be a feminist? And I felt, if my mom couldn't have been a part of that conversation with these women, then, well, is that feminism? So, I always look at things through that lens and through that perspective. So plurality of voices. Some of the barriers that I have seen as young people entering into the workforce is this idea that, no, we no longer want to assimilate in a way to what is considered professionalism. But at the same time, it could also work against us, such as, not being able to talk in a way that is articulate enough for white people to feel comfortable and to accept you. And I have seen so many of my friends, personal friends, be passed up for positions because they talk with a Southern drawl, or they weren't able to assimilate in a way that others felt. which was just unfortunate. Now these folks are doing quite well in their careers. They're bank managers and all of that. But, these were some of the barriers that they had to approach very early on. And it's just unfortunate the amount of talent that we miss out on, and because of, just blatant ignorance and racism around, what does a qualified candidate looks like. And unfortunately, in my career early on, I never worked on the issues that impacted my community most because of this fear of, not wanting to be seen as, the only career that I can aspire to be is, diversity and inclusion officer at X, or, even a scholar. When we write about, the effects of racism on structural things, you kind of get pigeonholed to one category. So early on in my career, Southeast Asia and Chinese studies, I studied at Beijing University, which is the Harvard of China, for 2 years, and doing this work in Beijing. And I was like, and it was actually when I was in Beijing, the professors there was like, well, if you want to help out here, start in your own backyard first. So it was like giving myself that permission to, even as a Black person, to work on those issues that impact me most, right? And not feel as though I was pigeonholed to that. So when I think of this conversation, it's about empowerment. It's about, again, being smart about it. How are we being plural in our approaches in engaging those on the front line, those mid-level staff, all of that, bringing them all to the conversation and making them feel comfortable enough to evaluate what's really going on in an organization, in a society, or elsewhere. So I'll end there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Demi. And I'd love to hear more of your ideas and your tips that you would offer allies for supporting and standing with Black coworkers, and this doesn't necessarily have to be only at the leadership level. It's you're sitting in a conference room and you see an injustice occur. How would you recommend people approach, especially our white allies, how would they approach being that advocate and saying, this needs to change? Deshea, let's start with you.
In some cases, I think that it's easier for someone who's not Black to speak up in some ways, because I think the expectation is that the Black person is going to say something. And I think it's from a comfort level for those who are not Black, who actually speak up for Black individuals when they see an injustice or see racism. Their voice is a little bit louder, unfortunately. Our voice can carry, but I think there's an expectation that, okay, well, that was expected. And I think that when individuals who see it, observe it, feel uncomfortable about it, and say, I'm uncomfortable with this, that'll make, their white colleague say, oh, wow, I didn't know that I was out of bounds. I think there's some cultural things happening there, just in general, because we feel it in many instances and we may not say it. When we get to the point where we say it, it's a heightened level of racism, I think, in some cases, because we may see drops of it occur, or small instances where it adds up or it builds up. But in some ways, there are people who just in the course of our lives or in the course of engagements in the future, who that's how they think and that's their norm. And their norm sometimes is one that comes from their own personal background. And so they may say some things and not even realize what they said, because it could be ingrained in the course of just their thought process. I think this is where I kind of go back to the images of Black men and Black women in some cases, or people of color in general, are things that the media maybe has put out there, and people have become a condition to think that that is the norm. So in a professional environment where we're working and we're doing, great work, where we're serving in our community capacity or our leadership capacity, we may see it, and our voice should be loud on the issue, But just, I think that it's important for people to feel comfortable saying, you know, I'm not okay with that. And I just honestly think in some cases, when people who are not Black speak about something that affects Black people in a certain way, it will travel further and the impact will be longer. There will be people who will stop doing what they're doing and saying what they're saying because they know that there are other eyes on them, and there isn't an acceptance that they said whatever they said. The acceptance isn't there, and oftentimes people don't want to feel alienated. And so some of the racism that I've seen happen was intentional to alienate a person of color, and you can see it, and it's almost like all eyes on you again. And everyone's looking to see what you're going to say, what you're going to do. And when you just quiet that voice and say, you know, that I'm bothered by it, but you know, what's more important is that I have a family that loves me, I have friends that love me and care about me. And in this instance, this isn't a person that I'm going to take home with me. This is I get to leave this here and go back to my other life or the rest of my life. And I think that that's sometimes often not what we experience. We'll take that home and we'll have a conversation, say, do you know this happened? You know, we'll get on the phone with somebody and say, hey, do you know this happened? And I just feel that, you know, our ability to segregate that out and say that's that person. You know, I'm not going to give that person that much control over the space in my mind and change me to be one that I need to be loud and angry. You know, I can say something to them and I can stop it right there. I can say, you know what, that was racist. That was wrong. I didn't appreciate that. And to me, the question becomes, is that enough? For some, it may be like, oh, well, that's not enough. You know, you should go a couple of extra steps and you should go and tell. And I have done that. I've had to go and say, hey, I didn't like this. This person said X. Was interesting for me just in the course of my career, though. I don't know how this happened, but I've always had an opportunity to work under someone that was African American. I don't know how. You know, in the course of my time in radio, in the course of my time at the city, I pretty much worked under a person that was African American for the most part. And so I can go to them and have those conversations. And those have been the individuals that many times will stand up for me and say, you know what, I didn't like that happened. I just remember when you asked a question about a racist situation, there was a different instance where my manager actually said, no, that's not right. That's actually, you know, kind of borderline racist, and said, let's get up and leave the room. And I was like, am I supposed to leave the room? I guess so. My manager said it, and it felt good to literally get up from that space and walk out, because they also felt comfortable. I felt uncomfortable. And that individual actually ended up coming back and apologizing. And again, it was a higher level titled person that spoke, that took it to the, you know, higher echelon of that hierarchy and said, no, you can't do that. And I think that it's important, you know, to be able to, again, keep our cool, because the expectation is that, you know, a person of color is going to be, I don't want to say irate, but a little bit more outwardly and outspoken about a situation. So I think it's important for us to, you know, just try to maintain our cool, because again, once we leave that situation, you know, I have a son who is anticipating that I'm going to give him some of them jewels and nuggets of how to deal with situations. I have a daughter that is, you know, 4 years old now, but I'm going to have to give her them jewels and nuggets. Right. And so all of these things that I'm going through right now, I look at it and say, it's preparation for preparing the next generation for situations that they may have to deal with. But in the course of my life, at least hopefully I can do some things and say some things and influence some people, because that's all we have is influence.
Absolutely.
To be able to change some stuff.
Yes, thank you so much. And I do really quickly just want to go to Dr. Hall and Demi to get their tips for white allies. Anything that you would add before I move on to a question from the audience?
No, except that, sometimes it's just good for us to be quiet and let our white allies say things, because there are times when they need to speak, and their voice is going to be more powerful and influential than ours. And so I think it's the art of knowing when to do that, and to help our allies, give them as much information and understanding as they can to know who we are and the experience we have, because that strengthens them in the role that they can take.
And thinking about white allies who may be afraid to speak up, what would you say to them, Dr. Hall, to encourage that speaking up? And we kind of addressed it a little bit earlier, but I just want to give a clear.
Well, I think, again, you have to give them the information. Sometimes white allies don't have the information. So it's kind of like explaining what it's like to be Black in America sometimes, okay? What happens when you leave the door versus when I leave the door? What happens when I drive versus when you drive? What happens, and going through those different scenarios. Now, there's a reality here. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable speaking up. And I've had individuals say to me, I want to, but I'm just not there, And so I think we have to accept that fact, because it takes a lot of courage to do that, and not necessarily feel that they're not in our corner, but we're just not all, whether you're Black or white, you may not always want to speak up. Right. So I think we have to be careful about how much pressure and how much responsibility we put on others, because we all have to own a certain aspect of it.
Absolutely. And Demi, to you as well, any advice you would give, specific tips for white allies to speak up for their Black coworkers?
Okay, also from the Harvard School of Negotiation, influence is an equation of persuasion divided by resistance. And it was a lesson that I had to learn, even, just with Black Lives Matter, going down to Ferguson. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what level of education you have, what experience you bring. Unfortunately, white people will still see you as Black, right? And somehow the face of opposition to, the anti-police rhetoric is Black people and Black Lives Matter, which is not the case. So what it was a realization for me was that, to minimize that resistance, sometimes white people just have to hear from other white people. So I hear what Dr. Hall is saying about, providing them with that level of education. But I also think about it this way: as a person who identified as one point as being a humanist, right? And I say at one point because, again, I don't have the ability to do that, because at the end of the day, I can say I'm a humanist, but people will always see me for the skin that I'm in, right? I can go to China, I can go to India, wherever, that is a huge part of my identity as being Black. And I say all this to say that lead with empathy, right? And I just think about Dr. King, I Am a Man, just those movements, right? Ain't I a Woman, those pieces, right? So lead with empathy. You don't have to truly understand the Black experience to empathize with someone as a person, right? So we all know when, or maybe we don't, but I would like to think that we all know what's wrong, and when we are wrong in those moments, or when we may have said something that might have been racist or perceived as racist, right? So in terms of allyship, lead with empathy, right? Empathize first. How would you feel if you was X, right? And that's the way that I look at life, right? I don't care, some of my best friends are people who are white, Indian, all over the world. So, yeah, so I always say lead with empathy first, right? And let that be your guide. Let that be all the security that you need in terms of speaking up on behalf of a person, right? So yes, so I'll stop there. That was just my add-on, was to lead with empathy.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think this is a great question to end on. First of all of you are inspiring. Thank you, this person writes. And their question is, what keeps you going every day, especially when challenges keep coming up right after you work to dismantle another one meant to keep you down? How do you keep moving forward even when those challenges come? Demi, let's go back to you.
It's a good question. What keeps me going? I think being seen by my peers, being looked at by my peers as, a mouthpiece. I've always been that role in my family, right? And I come from a Southern family, and you don't talk back to elders or adults. I never got the memo, which led to a lot of, corporal punishment, but I think in a good way, right? Because it taught me to be that natural born leader, to advocate to call people out when they are wrong, right? So just that conditioning piece, all of that motivates me. I said I identify as a person of trans experience. I didn't always do that. It was being around people, understanding the importance of why pronouns matter for people. All of that really keeps me going. I'm an academician first, so there's always been this thirst for knowledge, always to learn more, always to do things better. And I'm young, so I'm intrigued by these kind of wicked problems, if you will. So those are the things that keep me going, those motivations. Having conversations with so many folks in the community in whatever role or hat that I'm wearing, right? Just having so many conversations with those people and just to see their trajectories just based off of that conversation. I consider myself to be this virus, right? And even if it's just infecting them enough to be inspired to go on and do X, right? Because while I would like to help out in all of these different issues, right? There's a reality that you can't. You're only one person, but you can influence many different people. So that is what keeps me going, and I guess what keeps me young through it all of dealing with all of what could be traumatic experiences, right? But seeing that trajectory and seeing that people are actually making moves and growing from their experiences. I'm big on restorative justice. You are not the person that you were yesterday. But what does that healing piece look like? So, I'm big on that work as well. So that's what keeps me going, just the nature of it. The idea that, yes, we can have a better society. I think what was frustrating for me is, growing up, and I'm only 30, so growing up and seeing people say, well, the kids are the future. I mean, at one point, I was that kid that everybody said was the future, but now we're still, at where we are now. So at what point will these kids not only be the future, but actually be the realization? And so that's where I'm at right now, my career trajectory. That's what keeps me young. Every year, I volunteer for the Summit of Black Male Youth at UW-Milwaukee, and we talk to over 1,500 young people throughout southeastern Wisconsin, and we have had students come from as far as California. So it's doing that work is what keeps me going. And then actually bridging people from dreaming to actualization and to reality, and knowing that we're doing this together. So that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me inspired.
I love it. Thank you so much, Demi. Deshea, what keeps you going?
I realize that the work I do and the life I live is not just about me. I am here as a servant. I am someone who God blessed, and again, I use spiritual as well. I'm here for a reason. There are some things that I am here to accomplish, and when situations and challenges come up, the challenges that come up right after I just completed another one or um, got past one challenge and another one pops up, I realize that the work that I do and the life that I live is going to be one that others will look at as an example. I know that I'm an example for a lot of young individuals, African-American men and women, people of color. I know, from when I look at like social media, there are people who are inspired by the things that I'm able to do. I use my education. I use my leverage of relationships. I use my influence to make positive things happen. And I know that if I stop or if I am taken off track, then some things that should happen won't, because there are some things that I have to do, and there are some things that others have to do. The work that Demi does, the work that Dr. Hall does, and Lindsay as well, and everyone here. Everyone has things that they have to accomplish that if they stop doing that, those things that should be realized in the flesh and things that should happen, they won't, because they are not for someone else to accomplish. They are for us to accomplish.
Right.
And so I look at the work that I do on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and say, before me, I can't think of anyone who said, let's make this the best King Drive in the nation. But in the course of the work that I have been able to be blessed to lead in the area, there may be others, there may be younger folks, there may be a next generation that comes behind me and says, I'm interested in economic development.
Mm-hmm.
Before I knew about economic development, I didn't know about it. And because that opportunity wasn't there for me, there wasn't a career track to be in economic development in college. There was no classes that specifically said, this will lead you to a career in public service doing economic development. And so what keeps me going is knowing that I live for a reason, that there are things that I'm supposed to accomplish, that my time, my energy, my effort is all that I have right now to wake up every morning smiling and saying, today is a new day. There's some things to accomplish. If I stop that, it will be, it won't be to the liking of my creator.
That's right. Absolutely. Dr. Hall, your motivation, please.
So first of all, just thank you, Lindsay, for today. And it was good to just be on this panel with Deshea and Demi. And just, I learned a lot just from all of you. The two things for me, one is my staff, my volunteers, anyone that's connected to me. When I have those challenges where you just want to just say, you know what, I can't, right? We all have those moments. I have to realize that if I am seen where I'm giving up or where I'm distressed or frustrated, that's going to rub off to my staff. And all of them are working really, really hard. So I really take it personally that I have got to stay up and stay motivated and be inspiring for them. What does that mean? That means that I have to make sure I take personal time for myself. So when I get those moments, what is it that brings me joy? You know, and do that. If it's reading a book, if it's just kind of getting away and going down by the lake, if it's just shutting everything down for a while, you know, what is that thing? You know, is it reading inspirational materials? What is that thing that gets you regrounded, brings you joy again, brings you energy again so that you can start that work that you have, that we're now assigned to do?
Mm-hmm.
The second piece that's helpful is I think of those that came before me. I think about those right in my family, my grandfather who helped integrate a small town during a time when he stood up and he could have been taken out of here, but he stood up with courage to raise my mother and her 4 siblings. Others that just took a stand. I think of John Lewis, who recently died. That man had a cracked skull in his 20s. He lived to be 80. He never stopped. And think about it. Back then it was even worse. I mean, you know, so many things were worse than they are today in terms of not having a platform, in terms of being taken out of here with no one really paying attention, but now we have social media. So many things. If you just go back and think about others who stood up for us to stand where we are now, that in itself for me is inspiring and says, Eve Hall, you cannot stop now. You do not have the right to do that.
That's
So
right.
that, that's what helps me deal every day.
Well, I can tell you what helps me deal every day. It's the Dr. Halls, it's the Desheas, it's the Demis of the world that are here to help us and educate us and lead us in many different forms. Thank you all so much for sticking with me. I know I really wanted to let you guys speak, so I didn't want to interrupt you. I hope that was okay to just let you go because you had such great insights, and it's so important to share our experiences and to share our insights with each other. And this shouldn't be the end of the conversation. All of us should keep these conversations going in our lives, whether it's our workplaces, whether it's our communities, every facet of our lives, keep these conversations going. So this actually concludes our Black Lives Matter Workplace Edition series. As I said, though, have your own Black Lives Matter Workplace Edition series with your own circles and communities. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you all for continuing this great work. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.